right, and we are live, and I'm so happy to be here today in this LinkedIn Live for Hardcore Soft Skills podcast episode. To be joined by a fascinating woman with a lot of talent, and particularly, I really love the book Invisible Introvert. As an introvert myself, I was very happy to have such a guide. Dr. Cindy Young, and Dr. Cindy Young, she is a former Navy, and she is the also a leadership and knowledge management consultant as well. She specializes in leadership development, career growth, and she has over 3 decades of experience leading others. And I'm very excited to welcome you to the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited too. This is my first LinkedIn Live.
Wonderful. No, yeah, and I see being if you don't follow Dr. Young on LinkedIn, you should because she has shares a lot of valuable content, also a Forbes contributor as well. And I was very fascinated by the title of the book, Invisible Introvert. And we're going to talk about that. But first I want to talk about
Okay.
your career because you're retired Navy. And I wanted to ask you, why did you decide to join the Navy?
It's practical. I needed money for college, and I didn't really understand going to college. It was in the 80s, and I was like, I just thought everybody's went, and I didn't realize the money aspect of it. So I joined the military, and they said they paid for college, and so it took me a while to get through college. I didn't get my associates till I think I was 22 or 23, and then my bachelor's I got when I was 27. And so I've continued to get my education, and thank goodness for the military's GI Bill. I don't have a debt on my education, but that was the main part of it. And I went to the recruiters on a dare. I was eating lunch, and this guy he'd been recruited. I didn't realize that if you got somebody else recruited, you got like a bump in your pay grade before you went to boot camp. And so I went there, and I said, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll join." And it all just kind of worked out. Then I did 23 years, and here I am.
Wow. And how was it? Was it different from, I don't know if you had any expectations, but how different it was from what you may have had in mind?
You know, I honestly, I joined delayed entry when I was 17, and it wasn't until I was 16 that I knew about the military. I was in Houston. I didn't really talk about the military. We talked about rodeos and brisket and
Hmm.
snakes in the backyard and everything. But it was not until I saw Top Gun that I actually knew there was a military. I know it sounds goofy. I know it sounds really uneducated, but it's really, that was when I first found out the Navy, and I didn't know I could join it you know, until that guy dared me to go the recruiter. So
No, yeah. And that's probably the case, perhaps for many that have joined the military and in general, from
oh
the
yeah.
movies and the fascination with it. So that's amazing. And in terms of with the book, which is all about being an introvert, how you describe yourself as an introvert, and how what is an introvert, and how would you describe that being an introvert impacted your career in the military?
Well, to answer your first question, I look at being introvert as somebody who's, the standard, you need time to recharge. And I do. I need time, quiet time. So I really get exhausted, especially if I go to a conference to speak. I'll speak and I'll have all this energy, and then I'll feel like, wow, I need a nap. And so I go off to my room for maybe a half hour, and I just kind of kick back and relax. And I get a coffee, and then I go and I listen to other people talk. But when I was in the military, it really wasn't a question if I was introvert or extrovert. It was just I did my job. I had my orders. I followed my orders. Whenever my leadership would tell me to do something, I would do it. And then as I grew and promoted, I had other duties I had to do, and so I had to make sure I was taking care of my people. And talking to people, the introverted side of me, where I didn't really want to talk, that's not really an option when you're in the military. You have to talk. So I k- I kind of put it as a work thing, and I just did my job like I was supposed to. But you can always go back and take a nap at lunch.
Yeah. And how did you decide to focus? Because it's been you had a very successful career in
Mhm,
the after you got out of the military as well, and in the fields of leadership and management that you have worked with. So with the book, particularly with being an introvert, and why did you decide to have a kind of like a guide? Because I really like the book in the sense that it provides a lot of practical advice for us
mhm.
introverts. I consider myself an introvert as well, than having to act like a as an extrovert in order to have those conversations or do the work. So what made you have a guide for that, or create the book? Were there any particular moments that you've had or difficulties in your career?
Um, well, my first job after I retired from the military was at a different company right down the road from where I work now. And there was so many things, I'm so used to being, part of a team, and I didn't realize that when you work, even as a defense contractor, when you work, you're really out there alone because they don't teach you, they don't mentor you unless you really get to know somebody. And I was lucky, I did get a mentor. And so there was times when I was like, why is my boss talking to so and so? Why can't I get him to listen to what I have to say? And I realized it was, my visibility. And there were times where I would go talk to him. He would say, "Come talk to me." And I'd go talk to him, and he'd pick up his phone in the middle of the conversation, and
Hmm.
it really frustrated me. So when I'm talking to one of my people, I'll put my phone down. I'll turn it over so I can't see the screen. That way that you know they don't feel like I'm being rude to them, because I felt really rushed when I talked to this guy. Well, you know, I wrote the book because I felt like there's other things you could do to help increase your visibility. And, one of them is knowing kind of how to read the room, but also how, what things you can do to make it perfectly known that you're capable. You're just quiet, and you don't have to be loud to get attention, the
Yeah,
positive attention.
exactly. Yeah, and it's just so hard because we know in terms of we presume that there are things that we need to do as like act as an extrovert, or just
Mhm,
like that it seems that are not aligned with our nature. But you provide a lot of interesting advice too, and in terms of the correct type of visibility. Now, one question in terms of getting into the specifics, because what I really like that you talked about evaluating ourselves first, kind of like doing a
mhm,
SWOT analysis, the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. Could you talk
mhm.
about that?
Yes. So I was first introduced to a SWOT analysis when working some business development, and you want to see how you level up to your competition, and find out where your weaknesses are and what threats from the competition are, and what things you can do to use your strengths, and what opportunities you have. So if you look at it on a professional development basis, somebody you can do this on your own, and you don't have to bring everybody else into it. But one of the things I find valuable about it is that it makes it very obvious to you once you've used it that there are things you can work on, and you don't have to go public with what you're doing unless you want to do that. You can bring your mentor into it and say, "Hey, look at this and tell me, am I off base?" But when you have stuff written down, I mean, at least people our age or my age, um, we're more used to writing than we are looking things up, surfing the internet for things. But it's it's kind of sticks with you more if you write it down. So if you get your box out and you write a SWOT analysis on yourself, you can go away with some actionable items that really help you. And I put that in the book, and it's easy. You can just draw up 4 boxes and SWOT and start writing. And you don't have to be perfect. You can just write whatever you want to write. So,
Yeah, and in terms for that, what's the next step? Because we identify, we do the SWOT analysis. How could
mhm.
that help you towards the steps to become visible?
Well, when you find out where your weaknesses are, you can write out a plan of action, and take your key assets that you have, and you can take those and look at opportunities. So if you say, well, I'm weak at talking to people, I don't know how to do this, find some. You can just write something very easy like find somebody that you admire, that you like listening to, or have a lunch and learn and sit there and say, hey, I just want to sit down and talk with you and see what kind of things you do to get ready for a briefing like this. And just practice with people you're comfortable with. You don't have to make it a big presentation, and you can eventually you'll get to where you're comfortable talking in a room, with your leadership. And your leadership doesn't want to have to train you to talk. They want to be able to come there and just ask you questions and get the answers that they need. So, practice makes perfect, but you don't have to be perfect every time. So,
Yeah, and I like when you mentioned about in order for us to know us to offer a lunch and learn or something along those lines.
mhm.
Could you provide examples of that, or how can we become visible by offering like lunch and learns or training?
Yeah. Well, lunch and learn is a very easy way. You don't have to have the company pay for anything. It's nice when the company pays for a lunch and learn, but you can, just say, hey, if you're interested in this topic, let's all meet for lunch and see if you can reserve a conference room, or if you have a kitchen area, get a few chairs together and just talk about a topic that you really enjoy. And you may find somebody has questions about it, and that's when you can show a tacit knowledge of your experiences, of what you've done and what you've done right or wrong. And when I was in the Navy, we'd come together at lunch, and lunch is pretty informal, um, at time, because the CO and the XO usually aren't down there for lunch with you, but you sit down for lunch and you're at a big table, and that's when you start talking about, oh, what's going wrong with the day, or hey, we got this evolution coming up. And so people will share with you their experiences, and when you call them like fishing tales, or sea stories, you really share a lot of your experiences and what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and you're doing it informal, so it's not gonna hurt you really. But there has to be some sort of trust, or people aren't gonna make fun of you for screwing something up. But when you do it, you get a really good vibe going, and that leads to more talking and more meals.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for networking events? Because it seems so uncomfortable for us to attend networking
Oh,
events.
um, I I'm not a big networking event person, but when I do, I always find out who else is going first, and then I recommend trying to see who else is going to be there. Um, Not that that would change my mind about going, but when I go to networking events, a lot of times I like to go for the speaker, and the other times I have to go to get my PDUs. I went this weekend for a networking event, with a friend of mine, because she's a PMP as well, and it was a painting event. It's called Paint with a Twist, and we painted something, and it was awful. It, so but it was a good chance to meet other people and to catch up and just talk. And we had a little icebreaker, which I'm not a fan of icebreakers, but it was fun. But
Yeah. I like that advice of knowing, like going with the purpose of you identify the list and you have a person that you
mhm,
want to meet with, or I like the networking events that have either some learning associated to it, because just going in and kind of like shaking hands and approaching people, it's
mhm.
very hard to do. So
It is, and you don't have to meet everybody. So don't put that pressure on you. You don't have to meet everybody. You can say, I'm going to meet one person, and just because there's always the closed groups, people who go there and see each other all the time and ask how your kids are and stuff like that. But if you don't know anybody, the best thing to do is just say, I'm going to meet one person, and don't put a lot of pressure on yourself.
yeah. Now, I want to go back to that what you were describing and your experience, like going in and trying to talk to your leadership about,
Mhm.
and they would kind of like ignore something. What advice do you have for introverts in terms of approaching a leader, or approaching that if we're interested in opportunities for doing different work? Any practical advice that you have of how we can approach that?
Well, it's kind of funny. I got promoted under this guy too. I got promoted a couple times.
Oh,
So I don't think he didn't like me. I just think maybe he just didn't realize that he was, you know, being rude. You with the cell phone, everything like that, and maybe that's just something that he's not going to outgrow. But um, so my big recommendation is to find a mentor. You don't go up to somebody and say, "Hey, will you mentor me?" Just start talking
Hmm.
to people, and eventually, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And so I had a great mentor that was not quite my boss's peer, but very close to it. And so he mentored me, and he's still in my circle of people I can trust. But we no longer work at that company. He retired, and I went on to a different company. But that's he gave me things I could do to talk to my boss, but there's a lot that I just didn't feel good about. So I eventually ended up leaving the company and going to work for the company I'm at now.
Yeah, and it's good that you say about finding a mentor or finding and not going with a direct like, "Will you be my mentor?" As if asking, it's a kind of it's
Mhm.
a serious question,
Yeah,
but finding mentors and also in seeing ourselves as leaders, because a lot of times, and you talk about it in the book, that perhaps we don't see ourselves about as introverts, as people that may want to take a leadership role. What is it? Is there an advantage of being an introvert and a leader?
there is, because introverts, we normally are, you know, we're quiet, but we're always thinking. And I'm not saying that extroverts aren't thinking. I think that extroverts are a little more dynamic. They don't shy away from speaking, large groups. But when we speak with a lot of thought behind it, with purpose. And I think that as an introvert, people listen up a little more because we don't speak a lot. It allows us to be heard a little more. It's kind of like when you say don't shout, speak quietly. So it forces people to be quiet so they can listen to you more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important. That's a good reminder for managers and leaders to kind of give the opportunity or make that space too for people that may not be extroverts and speaking in the meeting out loud, to kind of recognize the voices around us, and that is important to give space for the introverts. That doesn't mean that they're not interested in any role. That is important, that they're it's just making the space for that too. Now, how about faking extroversion? Is that a good approach, I guess, or is that
No,
yeah?
I
And how?
don't think it is. I think it's exhausting. Especially if you go to an event and you feel like you have to talk loudly to be heard. You know, it's exhausting, and it wears on you. It makes you want to stay away from those kind of things. So it's if you fake it, if the whole fake it till you make it thing is, I just don't agree with it. It's somebody will look at you and think, okay, this person, they can talk, they can speak, they can do all these things. Yeah, we'll put them in this position. It might be too much, or it might be perfect for them, but it's faking it is giving somebody a sense of you can do something that maybe you're just not ready to do yet. So no need to fake it. I think you just keep trying and do your best, and you'll grow, but
Mm.
don't fake it.
Yeah, and one other aspect of the book, and it's that you've integrate anecdotes from women, particularly who kind of felt invisible in the
Mhm.
workplace. What have some of the experiences that you have seen as women in the workplace, particularly in male-dominated environments like in the military, that perhaps that either eh, is the issue in general, like coming from better acceptance in the workplace, or perhaps this is something that we as either women or kind of at the workplace, what do you think are the general causes, perhaps, for what are some of the issues, and what are potential causes? Is this something that we may not see in ourselves, that we need to step up more in those different roles in male dominated environments?
Well, I think in the military, that there's more equality. Quite honestly, I think that I I had my kid when I was in the military, and so I was 22 when I had her, and so I grew up having a kid and being a mom in the military.
Um,
And I find that a lot of people, when they have a child in like where I'm in the defense industry, that a lot of
Hmm.
people are worried about being fired because if they have to go and take their kid to a medical appointment or stay home because the daycare is closed,
Yeah.
or the dad who says, "Well, my wife can't do it," and that automatically makes me think, "Why is wife always doing it?" But um, there's just so many things that people worry about that they can't raise their kid in a non-military environment. And I always have to tell people, hey, don't worry about it. 'Cause I have people that work for me that have young kids, and I have people that work for me that have adult kids. Because we have ranges of people that come in our offices, and I just got to just got to keep in mind that if we have a snow day, their school's going to start 2 hours late here because we don't know how to use snow plows here. We don't have enough of that stuff in Virginia.
Hmm.
So we just have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
And luckily our job, our office, we have the flexibility that we can do that. So this week we had some schools open 2 hours late. Okay, you know
Hmm.
do that. And
Yeah.
so I always believe in a forceful backup anyway. My forceful backup is, it's the topic of my next book, but forceful backup is about being ready when something bad happens.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I have in my team, is a whole force backup mentality, is that we need something to be ready in case something bad happens. And not necessarily being bad when your kid gets sick, it's bad for the family, but for the rest of people it's just like, oh, where's that person? Well, we don't necessarily need a person in the office all the time, but we're not going to fire them either. That's crazy. But it's just one of those things.
Yeah, and it's so important because it having the backup, like we don't operate like we assume we're always going to be available and everything's going to work
Mhm.
out perfectly, and then we don't have that that planning anticipation. So I look forward to read your book on that, and it reminds me of the concepts of knowledge management, because both being in the knowledge management
Yeah.
field, kind of like the continuity aspect of the keeping information. So no, that's wonderful. In terms of the skills in the book, you cover so many of the quote unquote soft skills that
Hmm.
in this podcast we talked about. You talk about problem solving. You talk about self awareness. Communication, so important too. What are top two, three skills that we you consider that now in this workplace that we live in right now, and particularly as introverts, that you think we should make it a priority to develop?
Well, I definitely think a speaking skill is a probably the top thing you learn how to do. Speak what you want people to know. Speak about, don't be afraid to speak up when you see something wrong or see something dangerous. We always had risk analysis we have to talk about, but talk about what you think you can do to solve the problem and speak the way. But also with speaking, look at public speaking. Look at, you know, contributing to an audience. A lot of times people want to know, hey, how can you go to these conferences? Well, guess what? They don't pay you to speak at most of these conferences, but they don't charge you either. So it's a good way to meet people and to get what you know out there, to share what you know, and get that visibility.
Yeah.
One other thing is good writing skills. Um, you know, as an introvert, I write a lot, and I don't know if that's something that a lot of other people do necessarily, but I'm always writing. And I think that, my undergrad is an English degree.
Okay.
So there's, I was talking with my editor because I also write for ISE magazines, Industrial System Engineering at Work magazine. I write a
Mhm.
management column for them, and I left out a verb in a bullet list. And he emailed me yesterday and says, "Did you mean to leave it like this? Hey, we should put it." I'm like, "Oh yeah, thanks." I forgot I even have a degree that I should, you know, the right verbs. And he's like, "Yeah, everybody needs an editor. So, don't be afraid to have somebody else read what you have, but be better, get better at writing, because a lot of work that you do that they evaluate you on is written." Um, I think that was three.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
mentioned public speaking,
Yeah.
writing, and going back to the writing aspect,
Mhm.
because even right now, because we think, ChatGPT AI could do it all, but it's just so important to write, because as you
Yeah.
have done with your columns and with the book, like explaining complexities in a simple terms, it just helps us think too, and we forget that writing is also thinking, so we need to be able
Yeah.
to do that effectively.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that writing helps you to think better because when you're writing, you're thinking about everything you want to say. You don't just have to know what to say before you write it. You need to write it first, and then you figure out what to say.
Yeah, that's a great technique, actually, that I should be implementing as well, in terms of the for the for the writing aspect. Now that we're on LinkedIn, so
Mhm.
we what advice do you have for introverts in LinkedIn? Because we connect with people, we may not want to post or comment. What are some keys to kind of help ease our way into using this platform effectively?
Oh, I think the first thing to do is to start contributing to somebody else's post. Um, Look and see what you're interested in. You can do searches. It has a nice little search bar up at the upper left, and you can search for companies and people, and just look for things that you have in common, things you can contribute to, or even learning who's who in the zoo. Um, back when they had the clubhouse, I think it was called
Yeah,
Clubhouse.
the platform that was, yeah,
Yeah, I used to listen in a lot of calls, and then I started participating in that, and then I kind of lost interest in it, and then we came back to work and stuff like that. But,
mhm.
a lot of people I connected with on LinkedIn. And so I still look at that. Now, the past 2 weeks, I haven't really contributed a whole lot because when you don't contribute after a while, you get where it's like easy not to contribute. But I'm like, I need to start looking at this stuff again. And so, I'm I'm gonna get back on there, starting again next week and start contributing again. And it's a good way to meet people, but also, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but it's a good way of learning what the new techniques are. And you can see how other people are being visible, and you may find a level of interest there that you didn't know you had. Knowledge management, there's a bunch of knowledge management groups on there,
Yeah,
and so there's a couple that I really enjoy, and one of them, there's some people in the group that the KM, I think it's Women in KM is what it's called. I don't know
yeah,
if you're a part of that group, but they
yeah,
just had the Empower KM. It was their first time doing an event, and so
yeah,
I listened in on a couple of things yesterday, and so that was good. You get to know people after a while, and you see where people are looking at and other things about KM, and so knowledge management, I just enjoy it,
yeah,
and so I find it's fun. But yeah, as an introvert, just contribute and get to know people, and you don't have to DM them and say, hey, I like this. Just start with emojis
yeah,
and then
exactly.
start to comment your experiences, and you'll start to share that knowledge that you have, and you'll learn something.
Yeah, and it's been, I don't think people really realize the value of LinkedIn in terms of for meeting people, as you say. And for
Mhm.
example, for myself, no, I met you at a conference several years ago, and keeping in touch through LinkedIn and
Yeah.
finding out about the book, and learning from your work, has been a great experience. So I'm very thankful for to be connected with you, and also with using LinkedIn as well as a good platform. Now, what if people want to connect with you, or if they want to know more about your work, what do you recommend for them to do?
I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. I have the little tilde before my name, and I learned that from somebody on Clubhouse because I was getting a lot of spam. And so I know now when I get emails from somebody that has the tilde, that they're
Oh,
just they just scrape my name off somewhere on LinkedIn. And I tend to ignore those emails,
yeah.
and those messages, because I don't want to be as some of the cool kids that are saying pitch slapped. I hate that. So,
Yeah.
when I see the tilde and then doctor, I just ignore it. I just delete it, and
Yes.
but otherwise, I'll respond if you want to say something, if you got somebody that wants to ask a question. I'm on LinkedIn every day, you know, even on the weekends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very active on the weekends in general. Like I see a lot of activity happening on LinkedIn on the weekends. It's
Mhm.
great. Now, thank you so much, Dr. Young, for being here on the podcast with me today, and thank you for writing the book because it's been a great guide for me. I learned a
Sure.
lot as well from reading Invisible Introvert. I recommend
Mhm.
anybody to just pick up your copy, and thank you for your service as well. So it's been great talking with you.
Thank you.